everyone, and welcome to Year 3 Literature Across Borders, our author dialogue between our illustrated non-fiction pairing, which the wonderful chair, Meghaa Gupta, will tell you a little bit about in a minute. So Literature Across Borders, for those of you who don't know, is a project to help children's and young adult literature travel across borders, both the books and the conversations about them. We feel that when these books are so critical to the development of empathy and the sociocultural values that are going to underpin the realization of human rights principles, they've really got to not stop at borders, otherwise we're missing the whole point. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is part of the university program, though it's also a public engagement project. So we will be sharing this recording through the website. And an exciting little bit of news for those of you who weren't with us for the last recording is that we are running a schools engagement project. So these books are for children and young people. They should also be able to be part of the conversation, and it shouldn't just be about adults talking to each other and talking over them. So we will be sharing and disseminating our research on that at some point soon. And we're really excited about how this is developing over time. So moving on to today, I am delighted to introduce the wonderful Meghaa Gupta, renowned children's author and publishing consultant extraordinaire and co-founder of Literature Across Borders. One of her books is a book we're looking at this year, and it's on the UN Sustainability Goals. So we were looking at poverty in the pairing, but for this pairing, we're looking at illustrated nonfiction. And on that note, over to you, Meghaa. It's so wonderful to have everyone here with us.
Thank you so much, Lexi, for that wonderful and, shall I say, slightly exaggerated introduction, but thank you so much. I am delighted to be in conversation with both our authors today, Matt Ralphs and Nikhil Gulati. Before I launch into the questions for them, a little bit about our authors and their books. Matt Ralphs writes children's nonfiction and middle grade fiction, often with a focus on history, inventions, myths, and folklore. He is also a children's book editor. And in May this year, we read his book, Norse Myths, an exciting new retelling of ancient stories, told by the Vikings. That's his book. And Nikhil Gulati likes telling all kinds of stories through the medium of comics, whether it is histories of long-lost civilizations or a ghost story set in his own home. His work can be found on www.oddballcomics.in. In May this year, we read Nikhil's book, The People of the Indus, which offers a wonderful glimpse into people of the Indus Valley civilization, their culture, their beliefs, and how they shape the course of human history. That's Nikhil's book. I think it's wonderful that we got an opportunity to delve into different histories in our dialogue in May. And with that, my first question to both of you is, you're more than writers. Matt, you also edit children's books, and Nikhil, you also illustrate children's books. How does that sort of feed into your writing, your work? I'd imagine that it'd be an advantage, but are there also challenges? Nikhil, if you could start us off.
No, so just one quick correction that I don't do children's books. I just do books. And I think I just write for myself, basically. And I'm happy, whoever wants to read it, whatever age group it appeals to. And it always surprises me, the different ages that actually come to my books. But I don't really write for kids per se. As far as like doing other things, like illustration for me is part of writing. I think I was saying before we started this, that to me, my medium of communication is comics, and it is not words and images. It's actually both together. So I can't imagine just writing words, and I can't imagine just doing like singular paintings or something. That like I cannot even think in that way. So the way I communicate is through comics. So for me, both go really closely together. And that's basically my medium of choice. I do illustrations separately sometimes for freelance work, but basically, my medium is comics.
Sure.
It's actually a superpower. Yeah, it is challenging because it's many different skills that need to come together. to make something work, but I really feel it is it's a superpower because I feel like it's closer to the natural way of communicating. Like when we are talking to each other, we don't just talk in monotonous words, right? We are using tone. I'm using like my body language, my hand gestures. I might tell you that, oh, I have my book is about this big, and then I don't have to say how many centimeters or inches or whatever. So we communicate visually, and comics lends itself to that natural way of communication very, very nicely. So it is challenging, but it's really fun.
Thank you, Nikhil. I think that's right. That, I think the best way of approaching children's books is not to sort of force yourself into that mold and just sort of approach it as you would approach a book. Matt, what about you? As an editor, getting into writing.
It was, as you said in the question, for me, it's been a huge advantage being able to do both of those roles. I entered publishing as an editor. I think subconsciously as a kind of way into thinking it'll be easier for me to become a writer if I become an editor first. I'll get the contacts but actually that engendered in me a love of editing and working with authors. But because I've worked as an editor in publishing for 20 odd years, I have a very intimate knowledge of how the relationship between editor and author works, because I've been on both sides of that relationship. And it's a critical relationship. A good editor can elevate a book into where it perhaps wouldn't have been able to do even with the author's greatest skill. It's a partnership. An editor can elevate, and so I appreciate an editor's work and how unsung they are, because they never get any credit. Editors are I've rewritten books as editors, as an editor, to turn them into something that is better, or sometimes all I need to do is just tinker around the edges a little bit. But I understand how the partnership works from both perspectives, and I learn from the writers that I've worked with. They teach me an awful lot. It's definitely a two-way street. I also know from both sides of the coin when I'm being lied to. I know that there's not been a death in the family. They've just been lazy and they've delivered their manuscript late, or because I've done it myself. So I know all the tricks. So I know when they're trying to pull the wool over my eyes. I know all of these things. So it's been a huge advantage, and it's a pleasure to actually work mainly with other authors, so I could steal all their best ideas and rip off their skills in my own work. So yeah,
I wonder if that makes your editors slightly nervous when they're working with you because of all the experience you bring into it.
I wish they were more nervous a bit, but I don't think they are. I don't think they have any more respect for me than they do for anybody else. No, so maybe that might be a slight challenge, but I don't think so. I can't think of a challenge it's brought me. I think it's only really good. It's helped me hugely in my role, both roles. Yeah. Did that make sense? I felt that was quite a rambling answer.
No, not at all. I think that's quite insightful. Sorry, Nikhil, did you have something to say?
I was going to say it made a lot of sense because I am just realizing the importance of editors. And as you said, absolutely an editor can make or break a book, and how important it is to find a good editor. And I've had that challenge here because I haven't met any comics editors.
Right.
I haven't found a good one because you need to understand the language of comics. But finally, I found one who I really love working with, and it's made all the difference. It's really making all the difference to my work.
Sure. Matt, I'm going to stay with you for the second question, where, a lot of children's nonfiction particularly is written by non-experts. And as an editor and a writer, I was wondering if you could sort of throw some light on why that's the case and what are some of the challenges and the opportunities it brings for publishers.
It's a really good question. One of my publishers, they sort of differentiate between their authors. They have experts in their field, people who know all about biology, they know all about science and technology, and they will use them to write books. but editorially speaking, they may need more help, more work, because that's not what they do for their day job. They're not writers. Whereas I'm not an expert in anything at all. I have a broad interest in a lot of things, but I can write. So I think from an editing perspective, you have to treat these different types of writer in a different way. Both can obviously produce wonderful work. Both have advantages and disadvantages. There are experts in the field who know how to write to children, but I would say on balance, most don't, because I think it is quite a specialized, difficult thing to do. Communicating with children, trying to explain really complex things to them, particularly in non-fiction, in a way that they can understand and it doesn't overwhelm them and doesn't overload them with too many technical terms, that's hard. That's the difficulty of, or the challenge of writing for children, is you can't assume any prior knowledge. You have to assume that all of this is new to them, so you have to kind of explain it in a way that also doesn't bog the text down in too much dull detail. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I feel very lucky that I get to kind of dip my toe in all of these incredibly interesting subjects, and sometimes I get to meet the experts because they get to read that, they get to tell me where I've gone wrong. My books are often fact checked, and I get manuscripts back saying, where did you get this from? This isn't right anymore. Things have moved on. This is a really outdated notion, whatever, and I have to change my text. So there's a place for both, but like anything, there are advantages and disadvantages of dealing with both. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question for both of you is, what level of prior interest does one need to have in a topic, particularly when writing non-fiction? You're not a subject matter expert, and what drew you to write about the Vikings, Matt, in your case, and the people of the Indus? Nikhil, if you could begin on that one.
I think interest is critical for me, and prior interest, because books take a long time to make, and a lot of publishers, I think, don't understand this, and a lot of people don't understand this, and I don't think I understood it before I started on this project, because this is my first big book, and you are not going to be able to sustain yourself unless there is the deep interest in the topic. At least that's true for me. And I used to work in I was not always doing comics. I used to be a software person back in my previous life or something. It feels like the previous life. And when I switched, and I was just sick and tired of the work that I was doing there, it felt so meaningless that I was like, I can't do this. And that's when I switched to making comics, which was a childhood interest. So for me, if I'm like, I decided that since I'm changing my my entire career, I'm not going to go back to something that I'm only half interested in, because that I was doing earlier anyway. So now if I've changed and actively decided to pursue this, I'm going to pick only topics that I'm deeply interested in. And Indus Valley was one of them. It was really an obsession for years before I even got to the book. And it was actually just some basic questions. And this is where I feel like even connects to the previous question about subject matter experts and stuff like that. It's basically just questions that we are in. And the expertise that somebody has developed for a certain topic is just something to go and refer to in order to answer those big questions, So for me, it's critical. I don't think I can do work unless I'm very interested in the topic, because I know I'm going to get bored at some point, and then I will find 1,000 ways to procrastinate and do other things and watch YouTube for hours, not even hours, for months I can do that. So it has to be a topic that just keeps drawing me back again and again and again. Yeah.
Sure. Matt, would you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I completely agree. In a perfect world, I am fascinated by what I'm writing. And so far, the non-fiction books I've written, I've always been interested in the subjects that I've got to write about. But also as a sort of a jobbing writer, sometimes I do have to take on work that I'm not as interested, but it's certainly will come through in the writing. If I'm not as engaged, I'm not as interested, it's hard to inject the level of enthusiasm and joy that I do try and put into my books if it's just not there. But I can normally tell pretty early on, before I've signed any contracts. Like, one of my publishers asked, I went in for a meeting to exchange ideas, and I had a few ideas I wanted to give to pitch to them. But I could tell early on that they wanted me to do a book about DNA. That's what they wanted me to do. And I went home and I thought, well, I'm not, am I interested in DNA? I don't really know if I am. I mean, I'm sure lots of people are. It is important and fascinating, but am I interested in DNA? And I tried to put together a proposal for it. And I thought, one, I'm not interested enough in this because it's too granular a subject, and I don't think I'll be able to do a good job. So I turned it down and said, someone else could do a much better job, someone who's an expert who is interested in this. So it was one of the rare occasions where I actually turned down work, which I don't normally do. But I completely agree with Nikhil. It's as a writer, I think any creative field, if you're not interested in the subject or what you're doing, the reader, the viewer, the listener, they will pick up on it. The soul or the heart won't be in it. You can't really fake it, I don't think. Even with non-fiction, which some people might think isn't as creative, but I disagree. I think non-fiction can be incredibly creative, and you can put as much art and heart and soul into good non-fiction as you can with fiction, which I think a lot of people don't perhaps appreciate that. But I think you do. It definitely helps. In an ideal world, I become obsessed with what I'm writing, and then I move on to the next thing. I have a broad range of interest, which is useful for me because it means I can write about lots of different things. But just not DNA. I don't want to write about DNA, as I've learnt.
Sure, I suppose everybody likes writing about other people. That's something that I've noticed. Every time there's some aspect of social history, I find myself quite drawn into it. But yes, those very technical subjects, it's better to leave them to the experts, perhaps.
Definitely.
Yeah. My next question would be, one of the challenges, and this sort of goes back to some of the answers that you've already given, but one of the challenges of writing nonfiction, particularly for children again, is, deciding how much of your research do you want to keep in and how much do you want to sort of knock off? Because if there's too much or there's too little of it, then it sort of saps the writing of its, of its power. So could you sort of tell us a little bit about how you researched both of these books and, how you distilled the information? Were there things that interested you enormously, but, eventually you decided to leave them out? And were there things that you didn't think were all that interesting, but eventually you sort of thought that it'll make for interesting material in the book? Nikhil?
I guess it's a delicate balance. But I mean, it has to be something that I as a reader want to read. So for me, that's the main criteria. And being a non-expert kind of helps because experts can get, really bogged down in details, and they can get really obsessed with like tiny things that nobody else cares about. So, but having said that, it's also possible to make anything interesting. If you just tell the story well, I think you can make even DNA potentially interesting. So it's a weird, delicate balance. I don't know if I have a good enough answer for this. I do try to.
No, I mean, if you were sorry, but if there was something about the writing of your book specifically, because there's so many things about the people of the Indus, was there something that interested you particularly, and in your research, you decided after researching that this definitely has to be in, and this maybe shouldn't be in?
Yeah, I mean, space, of course, was a constraint, so there was stuff that I had to leave out. But the broad topics, like the things that I really wanted to get in, I could manage to get those in. Of course, there were a lot of details that I couldn't put in. In fact, there is a whole. So the Indus Valley has 5 big cities, and there's one city that has been researched a lot, but the research hasn't been published. Like it's not out there in the academic world. It hasn't been published yet. It's there in like the professors and the archaeologists have the research. And I knew a lot of PhD students who have worked on that city. I'm talking about Rakhigadi. But it's just not in the academic, it's not published yet. So I just could not include it because I had nothing to cite. So I had to just leave that out completely. So there were things like that I had to do, but
Sure.
and this wasn't a commission project, so it was just something that I was working on. In fact, I didn't even have a publisher until I had finished the whole manuscript. And so it was kind of just a leap of faith. So of course I wasn't going to put in something just because somebody else thinks it should be in there. I was going to put in only stuff that I like. And I love geography and I love maps, for example. So every chance I got, I was putting in maps. And I wasn't really thinking about how many people love maps. In fact, I had assumed that nobody really cares about ancient civilizations, especially Indus Valley, because it's not visually as impressive as Egypt or something. So I had just assumed that probably nobody's going to read it. So I'll just go for exactly the things that I want to put in. so I did manage to get in most of what I wanted to put in.
Actually, you do say that you work very closely with Jonathan Mark Kierner on this. So how was that like? Did you, because I suppose you created it and he sort of did a lot of the extensive fact checking. Was that how it was, or?
He actually came on board towards the end. So when I had finished the manuscript, and I'm going to sound like a total novice here because I hadn't made books before this. I hadn't done research before this. I'm not a historian. I'm not even a writer. I was literally just doing this book because I wanted to see this book in existence. And I knew that I want to do comics and graphic novels, and I knew that I want to do long form stuff. I didn't want to do short things. I wanted to do full on books. So I knew all that, but I wasn't an expert at research or any such thing. So I literally did the whole thing myself. And I had finished the entire manuscript, including the drawings and the final drawings. And I had put END on the last page and put a box around it. And I was like, okay, I'm done with my manuscript. And then I started sending it out to people. And I sent it to a lot of the people whose research I had used. And Dr. Kenoyer is one of the archaeologists whose work I really love, and he's been doing it for decades. So I had used a lot of his research in the book anyway. So he was one of the people that I just, I sent the whole manuscript to, and I was like, hey, thanks for doing this. I love your work, and I used it, and I would love to know what you think about this. And most of the people I sent the manuscript to did not respond, but luckily he responded, and he was like, this is really good. It has a few issues with the interpretations of the literature, the academic literature. So if you're willing to fix all that, it can be a really good book. Otherwise, good luck. He spoke like that. So I just asked him, hey, do you know anybody who can help me fix those things? And then he was like, I can help you do that. And he very generously offered, and he was like, I don't need any money or anything, but if I work on it, it's going to be a substantial amount of work. So then we paired up, and then we spent another good 4 to 6 months on it. And it helped that he's also an artist and illustrator himself. And so he has illustrated, and he has visualized uh, dresses, hairstyles, the architecture, etc. himself. So he gave very pointed feedback. Like, for example, on one of the pages, I had drawn a house, and I had drawn a little yard outside, and there was a wall around it. And when he looked at it, he was like, you know what? We don't have any evidence for brick walls around. Yeah, there's that one right there, the first page itself. So I had drawn a wall, like a brick wall around the compound, and he was like, we don't have any evidence of brick walls around the compounds. So if you want to make that, if you want to show that, you can show a bamboo fence. So then I changed that and I made a bamboo fence. That's the level of detail that we went into from the time that he came on board. And that actually was a huge boost of confidence once he went through the entire manuscript. And it was also actually quite a lot of my main thesis, he he didn't have an issue with. So it was just minor things. So I felt good that, okay, that means my research has been decent, you know. And so yeah, that partnership was really fruitful, but it came just sort of, you know, just by chance. And yeah, he came on the project towards the end when I had finished the whole manuscript, at least like one big draft of the manuscript.
Sure. Matt, what about you?
I think my experience with Norse Myths was very, very different. It was a commissioned piece. I didn't have to pitch for it. It was offered to me, I think, because it's a series of books and the author couldn't write this one for some reason. So I was approached to write it. So, and not only that, the editor had told me exactly what she wanted in the book, down to the exact contents list. Each of the stories, all of the non-fiction sections as well. So I had a plan to do exactly what she wanted, essentially, and word counts, everything. So it was really just, she even sent me lots of research as well that she'd already done previously. So it was quite a straightforward project, far more straightforward than most of the ones that I have to do, where I have to do all of that work. I have to do most of the structuring and deciding what's going to go into it, and then that goes through the process. So this one was, I didn't have to do any of that. It was just, right, this is the book, write that. You've got 2 months, and it was a joy to do that.
So maybe, I mean, as if you could sort of quote from some other experience you might have had with another book as an editor and as a writer, where you sort of had to guide someone on, or guide yourself, I think, on what to keep in, what to keep out. I like this, but maybe I shouldn't put it in here.
Yeah.
If you could sort of.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, because pretty much every other book, I do have to go through that process.
Yes.
Usually, you know, whether I come up with the idea or the publisher suggests something, then I go away and I will come up with a proposal. And like Nikhil, I will decide what interests me. What do I think's the fun stuff? And the stuff that isn't as interesting, I will put on a sort of a second list if you've not got enough room. But the thing is, in a children's book, there's never enough room. There are never enough pages, there are never enough words to put in all the things that I want to put in, because I find it all fascinating. You know, I love all of the research. I tend to get quite attached to it in a weird sort of a way. When I'm working on something, I get sort of attached to the people or the technology or whatever. I get quite involved with it. So I want to put it all in, and then, but I obviously can't do that because, you know, as a sort of a temporary expert on the subject, I might be obsessed with all this stuff, but your average 10-year-old doesn't. They just want the cool stuff. So that's what I have to try and decide. What's the cool stuff, and what gives the context of what I'm trying to explain? What gives a big picture so none of it feels tacked on? Norse Myths, I thought, was brilliantly structured. Again, I can't take credit for it, but if I was going to structure it, that's probably what I would have done, because it's a wonderful mix of non-fiction and fiction, and everything is explained as you read through it. And that's kind of what I try and do with all the books.
And how do you decide what's the sorry?
No, go on. No.
How do you decide what's the cool stuff? I mean, you know, how do you go about thinking, oh, that might be interesting to a 10-year-old?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a gut feeling, I think, because I'm still the same 10, 12-year-old that I was when I was 10 or 12. I've not really grown up at all. That's why I like to write children's books. So that's normally quite interesting. Other people, you know, the editor might actually, they say, because they're normally more sensible and they have a better view of what they actually really want in the book, they might say, actually, Matt, we need a bit more context. Take out some of the battles and put in some of this other stuff, which, you know, because I'm desperate to do a book about battles in, you know, like the 50 most amazing battles, but no one wants to do that because it's for children, and it's, again, you know, that's just something which I mention every now and again, and everyone goes, we're not going to do that, Matt. No, we're definitely not doing a book about war, but I'm going to keep trying. So yeah, it's a gut feeling, I think. What I think is cool. I don't think war's cool, by the way. I don't think that. I just find it interesting. I just want to, you know, just contextualize that. So yeah, I think it's a gut feeling for me. It's what I find interesting, and I think if I find it interesting, hopefully other people will as well. And so far, that seems to be what's happened with me so far.
Sure. Actually, I mean, since you're talking about war and you're talking about things that interest you, something that I really liked about Norse Myths was, I mean, some of these stories are really dark. There's fickle gods in it, they're bloodthirsty beasts, and I know a lot of 10-year-olds who find that extremely fascinating.
Yeah.
Every time I go to school, they want to talk about these things. But what's great about the way you've sort of written the book is that you've written about all of this in this sort of very light way. You don't lose this sort of sense of gravitas about it, but at the same time, it doesn't get overwhelming. Sometimes for me, especially, it's not something I particularly enjoy reading. But I didn't find myself feeling overwhelmed by it at any point. And wondering if there's any advice you might have for writers who are approaching things that are essentially sort of dark material.
Yeah.
To begin with. Yeah.
So that's something I think about a lot when I'm writing, because I do tend to gravitate towards quite dark subject matter. I find it interesting, but obviously we don't want to traumatize children. We want to create stories or non-fiction subjects that tackle dark, dangerous things in a way that they can cope with, and that will hopefully allow them to cope with the real world. It gives them a little bit of a taste of perhaps what, the darkness and the danger that we see outside in the real world sometimes. It's a safe way for them to feel a little bit of fear, a little bit of danger, and see the darkness in life, which sadly is all around us. So I think with Norse myths, particularly, because they're existing stories anyway, they're out there. I'm not writing anything new. I was safe in the knowledge that I could kind of get away with the gore and the violence, because there's a lot of it. I mean, I reread it today to remind myself, and I think every single story has someone bleeding somewhere, or being decapitated, or someone being killed. And there are a couple of serial killing dwarfs in there. I didn't, they just kill literally just for the fun of it. I thought, oh God, I can't remember writing that, but yeah, but that's seriously quite dark. But I try and do it in a way that's kind of light and easy to digest, and I'm not focusing on the gore, and I'm not focusing on the pain, or that kind of thing. Fairy stories are dark. These are basically Norse fairy stories, so they deal with dark subject matters, but the writing style I chose was fairly light, a little bit ironic in places. I tried to use a bit of humor, although some of the stories are written in quite a serious way. But yeah, I think violence, death, horror, that kind of thing needs to be handled very delicately with children, but I don't think they should be shielded from it, because as you say, they think it's really cool. They generally speaking like that kind of stuff, and I'm very happy to write it for them. I wrote this is one of the fun books I wrote, called Tales of the Damned, which is retellings of horror stories, which I got to do, and I can't believe what they let me get away with this. I was quite surprised. One of the tricks I would say, if you do want to write horror for children, and you want to try and make it as dark as possible, push your writing further than the editor will accept. And then when they push back and say, can you take some of this gore out? You say, well, I take some of it out, but you normally end up with a bit more than they would like. So that's my one very niche tip for horror writers for children. Push it as hard as you can, and then you negotiate, and you should get a bit more than maybe they would be comfortable with. That's my main tip for writing dark things, because kids love it. I mean, generally speaking, they'll lap it up. So
yeah, that's great advice, actually. That's worth its weight in gold, this advice.
Yeah, I think I just hope there's no censor board in there that's going to just ask you to go and revisit the whole manuscript, because that also happens sometimes. But I think it does kind of, in a way, boil down to the language and the use of words. And I suppose it's also slightly instinctive, because I don't think every writer has it in them to get that sort of delicate usage of language to be able to tackle. Sometimes people really struggle with dark material, because they're not able to get out of their own headspace in a way, and be able to sort of reimagine it for a younger audience. But Nikhil, I'm going to come to you, and you've done something really interesting in this book, where you sort of inserted yourself into the narrative. And Laura is here. She was one of the students who read the book as part of our pairing in May. And I think what was lovely that was sort of pointed out in the course of the conversation was how it felt like a bit of a museum visit, because you have yourself sort of guiding, the reader through the lives of these people, through the way they viewed the world and viewed themselves. I wanted to ask you, how did you sort of come upon this idea, and were there any sort of challenges in sort of visualizing this history by placing yourself in there?
I basically copied the idea from somewhere else that I had seen. I don't know if you've heard of Scott McCloud, but he makes comics, but he also writes, he has a couple of books that are about comics. And so he uses himself as a narrator, and I thought it was a great device. And when I was learning to make comics, and while I was making this book, I was really referring to his book a lot, for like, just for ideas and stuff. So I thought it was a great device to use, and especially for something like history, because the narrator just helps me, like that you then see everything from a human perspective. Like when I'm showing you Mohenjo-daro, and if I show you this man standing there amongst the ruins, you can sort of imagine yourself being there, and you kind of get a sense for the space and the size of this entire city, that if you were there, you could, like, this is probably how you would see it. And same thing with like artifacts, like seals, for example. The Indus Valley has a lot of seals, and Indus Valley doesn't have very grand monumental art, but it has very tiny but very refined art. Like, it's really miniature stuff. So I could literally just show the narrator holding it in his hands. And so when you see the fingers there, you get exactly how big that little thing is. So without me having to say, it's 3.5 centimeters or whatever, I don't have to say any of that. I can literally just show you. And in fact, one of the things it really helped me in was like, my main thesis for this book was that why wasn't this civilization as grand and impressive visually as Egypt? Because Egypt is absolutely stunning when you look at the artifacts and the monuments that are there. But the Indus Valley has none of that. And that was the question that drew me to studying about this civilization. And the answers that I found were just absolutely fascinating. In fact, the way the society is organized, the way people think about how humans should organize themselves was so different from the other places that there was actually no role for big monumental art and architecture. And the way it was organized, because it's a very decentralized kind of a society, and it has no warfare for 1,000 years, which I found was absolutely fascinating. Like, how do people organize themselves for 1,000 years? They have the biggest cities of the time. It's the most widely spread civilization. It is the most materially rich civilization. Like, the average person in the Indus Valley is far richer than in any other civilization of that time, Egypt, Mesopotamia, or China. So, and yet you don't have war? Like, how? What do you mean? How is that even possible? I thought war is just a given, that if there are humans, there's war. If there's hierarchies, the powerful will have weapons and armies and stuff to fight for it. So I found that interesting. And so because I wanted to compare Egypt, Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, it helped to have a narrator, because I have a page here where the narrator is standing next to an Egyptian sculpture. And then he's...
Okay, if you've got it.
Oh yeah, I have it here. So I can just make him stand next to an Egyptian sculpture and have him hold in his hands some sculptures from the Indus Valley. This is the page. Well, you can see this.
Yes.
So he's standing next to a sculpture of a pharaoh, but down here, there are these small sculptures, and you can see the hand behind those two sculptures to kind of suggest the size. And so this kind of stuff I thought would be really fun. And even on this page, he's standing next to, so this is a Mesopotamian stele. It's depicting victory in some battle. So I just made the narrator stand next to it to show the size and stuff like that. So I thought this would be fun. And I enjoyed having the narrator so much. And I had experimented with having a different narrator first. So somebody was like, oh, you should have a female narrator because, you know, women are not there in these kinds of books or whatever. So I was trying to be a little bit woke, and I put a lady in there, and I finished like a whole chapter, and then it wasn't feeling right. And then I realized that, you know what, it's my voice, but somebody else's face. Might as well just put my face. Screw it. I'm just gonna put myself in there. And it's based on me, and it's my younger self when I had more hair and black hair. So it's that narrator, and now all my history stuff has the same narrator. So yeah, so it kind of happened in a roundabout way, but I really enjoyed having the narrator in there.
Thanks, Nikhil. No, that was I think that was really interesting, and I especially enjoyed the way you sort of reimagined this to literally talk about these people who didn't feel the need to build pyramids at a time when, you know, those were the awe-inspiring structures in the world, and ones that we go back to and admire in museums and you know, historical places, apart from actually revisiting them in person. And it was something that I think was something that caught the attention of the students as well when they read it. But I'm going to come to you, Matt, for the next question. You've already said that for the Norse myths, you didn't quite do the structuring of the book. But ideally, when you think of, okay, I want to write about this, I want to sort of write children's nonfiction on this, how do you go about structuring the book? Because that's really key as well, because there's, again, you know, so much information. And how does one make it interesting? If you have any advice on that.
I suppose it does come down to the subject matter. Sometimes my books, if they're about, like I did one about different types of vehicle, like vehicles that change the world. So there's 50 vehicles that change the world, and it was 80 pages, and every vehicle had a spread, 2 pages, big picture text, and then the next page, and that was done chronologically. So you start off with chariot, and then you end up with a solar powered aircraft. So the structure wasn't difficult to decide at all. It was just one per spread, and then it's chronological to get a sense of history and how fast technology has changed, particularly over the past 100 odd years. Other ones are far more difficult to structure, Norse myths, for example, because there's a lot more in there that children may not understand. Everyone understands what a bus is, and so you don't have to contextualize what that is. Whereas something like Norse myths, or I did my very, very first non-fiction book was called Season of the Witch, which is basically about magic throughout the ages, and it's Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt. So that was structured, had to be much more considered, because we had an awful lot of time to fit in. But not only am I talking about magic, I'm talking about the cultural context that this magic existed in, and that might need 3 or 4 pages. Or if a society didn't really have much magic, but they had a little bit, then it might only get 1 spread. So it's there are an awful lot of decisions that have to be made to structure a book, and there's no cut and dried way. Really, I think as a general rule, you want to keep it as engaging as possible. Don't spend too long on one thing if you don't need to. Keep it sharp, keep it interesting. Every page turn something new, something exciting, preferably, and also try and, if you can, tell a story. Tell the story. This is the story of magic, and the Norse myths is the story of the Norse and their stories as well. So every book has to be treated differently. Some are really simple to come together, some are far more difficult, and you need to consider lots and lots of different things. I also need to consider the artwork as well, because obviously it's not just about my words, not by a long chalk. It's about what kind of artwork are we going to have? Do we want something more graphic novel in style, with lots of small pieces of artwork that tells a story on a spread, or do we want one beautiful piece of artwork with not very much text? So it's about the aesthetics as well. There's a lot to think about. There's an awful lot to think about in these things, and with the goal is to keep the child interested and informed and excited by the subject matter. Chapters, sometimes lots of different heading types, text types, different types of graphics on the page, boxes that text is in. there's a lot to consider, and it's one of the most fun parts of the job, actually, because once you've got the structure, it feels good, the editor understands it, and then you've got your blueprint to write the book from, and you can feel confident that it's going to work. Yeah, it's really important to get it right, because otherwise kids will get bored and they won't want to read anymore.
Yes, and I imagine it's more challenging with something like the Norse myths, as you did point out, because it's all sort of, you're not really going in a sort of historical order. There's no ready chronology to follow. And I think that's what makes some things easier and some things harder. I suppose one has to then rely a little bit on instinct and experience.
Definitely, yes. And with Norse mythology, everything connects, because it's a mixture of non-fiction, like it's a mixture of the Norse and the Vikings and what they did, where they lived, and what kind of world they lived in, but also it's about the stories that they told, and there are very strong connections between those things. You can't get a full understanding of one without understanding the other one. Their stories are full of violence and big themes and a sort of sense of impending doom, because their lives were really hard and they're often short and brutal, and death wasn't very far away, in one form or another. So, and to make sense of the world, they created these wonderful gods, but to understand the stories, you have to understand the world. So yeah, it was treating those two things and trying to splice them together. So, oh yeah, I see how that connects without, again, overloading the reader. I won't say child, because I hope that adults will read the books and get as much out of them. I don't really write self-consciously for children. I just write in the way that feels best and the most engaging. But yeah, yes, it's a complicated business, but it's one of the fun parts of doing it. If you get a good structure, then that's half the job done.
Sure. Thank you. And Nikhil, what's interesting about the people of the Indus is that you don't even have a table of contents. So was that a deliberate choice to not have it? Because
I think I just forgot to put a table of contents. The number of pages had to be like multiple of 8 or something, and I don't think I had room for it. And anyway, I felt like I guess I didn't feel the need for it, because it's just.
Did you have an argument with your editor about it?
No, I didn't.
You just decided there's going to be no table of contents in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I really very consciously made the effort to make it a narrative that you can, like, that it should just flow from one chapter to the other. It's not separate things. So if you were to jump around, I don't think it would make sense. I'm not sure actually if it would make sense, but it was meant to be read in order. In fact, I hadn't even put page numbers, and the editor was like, no, we have to put page numbers. Yeah, it wasn't a conscious choice. In fact, only after you asked this question, like in the email, I was like, oh yeah, it doesn't have a table of contents. And I was wondering why I didn't put one in.
Okay. No, I mean, it's really interesting, because I opened the book and I, instinctively go to the table of contents, because as a reader, I really want to know what the book has before purchasing it. And I mean, I thought it was intriguing that you didn't have a table of contents, but it's a lovely book, and it's just the right size, with just 5 sections, and all of the sections are really interesting. So Nikhil, I'd actually jump to another question for you, which is, which bits of the book did you find, did you enjoy illustrating the most, and which bits did you think were particularly challenging? I mean, you have this whole section where you talk about the role of language in civilization, and I'd imagine that wouldn't have been the easiest to illustrate. So if you could sort of give a little sneak peek into that, and maybe hold up some of the illustrations which you particularly enjoyed, or which you thought were challenging and you kind of had to really apply yourself.
Sure. You are right that chapter was one of the most challenging, because what am I supposed to draw when I'm talking about language? But in fact, I mean, I guess it's those kinds of constraints that make you think in new directions. So in fact, that chapter is one of my favorites now, because I was sort of forced to come up with different things. So I invented these kids who are going to writing school, and there's a few pages of wordless. I don't know if people have seen the book, like how many people have actually seen the book, but every chapter has a few pages that's some fictionalized family or some people back in the day, like 5,000 years ago. And it's wordless on purpose because we don't know, we haven't been able to decipher their texts, so we don't know what language even they spoke. But the question of language is one of the most important in the study of this civilization. So I actually started with talking about Mesopotamian cuneiform because that writing system we have a lot of information on, and the writing system is very similar to the Indus writing system. So I thought, let me get into the beginnings of writing, and that was a topic that I found just absolutely fascinating. So when I was doing the research, I was like, I know this is all. So there's like the first 10 pages are all about Mesopotamia. So I thought, why not? Let's get into it. Let's get into why we even started to write and what that enabled in terms of, you know, social organization or whatever. And because, and in fact, it starts with the question that who came up with this idea to write. And I used to think that it must have been some storyteller who had a really compelling story to tell, and they wanted to like write it down so that it could travel, you know, to places and people could just read it. But apparently it was an accountant who came up with the idea of writing. So I got into that, and so I showed some Mesopotamian art in this. So it was challenging, but it was really fun as well. Other than that, the most challenging bits were actually visualizing the places and the people in the past, because so few people have actually worked on the Indus Valley. Like there's a lot of academic work that's been done. In fact, the archaeology is superb, and there's been great work done for the last 100 years. But because it's not visually as appealing, at least at first glance, so a lot of in popular writing, very few people have done anything. They haven't even touched this civilization, which is a shame and a surprise, and also an opportunity, because I was like, okay, low hanging fruit, let me do this. And in fact, that has made the book reach places, because people are like, oh, Indus Valley, yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't know anything about it, and I don't like to read history books. But oh, this is a graphic novel, all right, give it to me, I'm going to read it. So that, because there's nothing else on the Indus, if you go and search for anything on the Indus Valley, this book comes up. So in a way, it helped as well. But the challenge was that very few people have actually visualized what the ruins that we see today would have looked like back in the day. So that work I had to do from scratch, you know, like if I had to do any other period in Indian history or world history, I would have a lot of material to draw upon.
Yes.
So it would make my job a little bit easier, but here I had to do it from scratch. So that was a bit challenging. And in fact, even so, like if I'm drawing the scene of a city, let me show you. That's fine.
Yes.
It's just like if you're standing on a rooftop, this is one of this one. It's like sort of a bird's eye view of when you enter Mohenjo-daro through the gates. And so when I'm drawing this street, I was like, okay, what would I have seen back then? What would it have? Would it have vehicles? Would it have people just walking around? How big were the streets? And would I see animals? And then this question, when it came up, then I went actually researching, like, okay, what are the animals that I would have seen on these streets? So yeah, so that was a bit of a challenge, but also, I guess, an opportunity. Yeah, those bits were a little.
Okay. Matt, I wanted to, because you said you're not an illustrator, you work with an illustrator on this, and of course, Norse Myths is a full color book. Do you recall having conversations with your illustrator about particular spreads, and maybe if you have examples of when a spread just turned out more beautiful than you sort of thought of it when you spoke to her, Katie? Katie Ponders illustrated this book. And were there spreads that you felt yourself sort of struggling with? How does one imagine this visually?
Okay, so unhelpfully, to answer this question, just like the structure, I had sadly no contact with Katie Ponder on this, and I didn't even have anything to do with the artwork. Again, unusual for me. Usually with the books I work on, for example, just to pick another example, this one, Season of the Witch, which is a similar kind of thing. I usually do have far more contact with illustrators and artists. Alongside the writing, I will usually be asked to create illustration briefs that go along with the artwork, to go along with the text. That will be part of my consideration when I'm doing the structure of the book. I will want to visualize each spread and imagine what it will be like alongside the text. So it's very much part of the job that I have, is to think about how do I accompany, how do I, there are any suggestions, by the way, the editor has final say, but as I'm structuring the book and planning it, I will think about what the visuals are going to be like opposite the text, and having some kind of control over that it helps me hugely as the writer, because if I can say, well, I know I'm going to have, say, okay, let's say hypothetically I did actually brief the artwork for this. If I suggest, right, I want Fenrir on it, as we can see there, and a couple of the gods, and I can brief that as it's being done, I know that the reader is going to have a lovely big picture of a black wolf wrapped in a chain, which is part of the story. And that means I don't have to necessarily use that description in my text, because I know there'll be a picture of it, which means I can use the 30, 40 odd precious words that I have to tell the story on something else. I can add in some more dialogue, or I can describe something that I know that isn't going to be on the page. So the best way for me to do this is to have some control over art briefs as well as the text, because then that means I can be very specific about what I write. I can say, right, well, I know there'll be a picture of that, so I don't need to describe it. But then the editor might say, actually, we're going to change it, so I have to change the text a bit. I mean, that's very granular. That's a very granular way of writing. But with children's books, words are precious because you never have enough of them. So I want to use them as efficiently as I possibly can. And the artwork is so precious and so important. And working with, again, I didn't get to work directly with Katie Ponder, but I've been so lucky to work with amazing artists. I'll just give you an example. Like, I had to brief Season of the Witch, and one of the most beautiful pieces that was in it, and I gasped when I saw it, was where are we? This one here of a Mesopotamian god called E, and I just thought the colors were so stunning, and it was, I'll write a brief, and it's just words on a page, and I think, well, they'll probably, hopefully it'll look nice. And when the artist actually turns into something glorious like that, it's the best part of the job. It really is, because suddenly my words have so much more power behind them because of their wonderful artwork. People pick up these books because of the artwork, not because of my words. They pick them up because of the artwork. So if I can help them create something that marries up with the text, and that's one of the most pleasurable parts of writing for children, or writing illustrated books. I love writing, but I've done a lot of illustrating briefs because as an editor I did them as well. So it really helps me as a writer to be able to think, I know what's going to be alongside this. It's a joy. It's a real joy, because there are so many wonderful artists out there, and it's brilliant. I love it. So what was your question? Was that the question?
No, I mean, you did answer the question. I was asking you about your experience with the illustrations. And I think what's always wonderful is, because even when you work with an illustrator, sometimes you don't sort of, you're not sitting next to each other. So you send them the brief, and they come up with something sometimes which just makes you catch your breath, because it's just
so. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
I really liked this particular page. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correct. I think Balder,
that's it. Yeah, definitely Balder. Yeah.
And I think one of the students as well pointed out how the illustrations are fairly modern. It's not very folklorish, the illustrations. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not really an artist, but she really does manage to capture the expressions on their faces quite nicely. And because it's color, I think it makes a lot of difference. I think, Nikhil, you agree with that, because the book that you did after this was full color and just absolutely gorgeous. Color just, it's called color for a reason. It just makes things come alive. But my next question to both of you would be a little bit about the publishing process. I mean, you said that, Matt, you said this was a commission project, and Nikhil, you said this was an original pitch. But, if you were to sort of tell an aspiring writer about the publishing process, and particularly for illustrated nonfiction in the UK and in India, are there sort of bits of advice that you might have? Nikhil, maybe we can start with you, and then Matt will come to you.
I am not a huge fan of publishing in India right now, and I have published 2 books, and I might get very impassioned about this if I keep talking about this, but my suggestion to people publishing in India especially would be just make something, because a lot of people have ideas and they talk about it a lot, but there's nothing to show for it. And I think like at least that's how I work. I don't know how it works in other places or even in India. I've published a couple of books, and I was lucky that this one got published, like got picked up immediately. So I didn't have the usual struggles of like, I don't know, 30 rejection letters or something. But that was because I had the whole book done. So I think a publisher was just interested that, oh, already you've done the book, so we don't have to do much. And in fact, like I said, that big publishers in India, they don't know anything about comics, like zero. So, so there was no editor who could be like, we can do it this way or that way. They were like, they just literally did some copy editing and they fixed some spellings or British or American spelling. And this sentence, maybe you can cut this 1 or 2 words. So they didn't really do much. So I don't know what I'm supposed to say about it. So yeah, this other book, actually, I don't know, I want to show this as well. This is the second book. This I just did the illustrations. It's called The Book of Emperors. It's a history of the Mughals. This is all color, and this was actually commissioned work, but so it has a lot of text, but it has these like double page, fully illustrated spreads that talk about some aspects. Every page has some illustration, but then every once in a while there's like a little more. So yeah, stuff like so here I did work with an editor who's actually a friend, and she was instrumental in giving this book a shape. And that's when I started to realize how useful editors are and how much of a difference they can make. But yeah, so I don't know, as a suggestion, just make something.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's how it's everybody. People have so many ideas, but there's not much to show for it. So let me see something. People reach out to me and they're like, oh, I have this idea. I want to do an illustrated graphic book for kids on yoga. And then I'm like, well, do you have something to show for it? And then they don't have anything. They just have ideas.
All right. No, thank you for being very candid, Nikhil. I mean, children's publishing in India, sorry, I'm just going to make a small case for it, which is to say it is fairly new and there is not much by way of historical experience to go by. And so I suppose, and there aren't too many, the reason I also asked you is because there aren't too many works of illustrated nonfiction. I don't think we have any publisher that can equal to a sort of a DK in the UK, which just does these wonderful illustrated nonfiction books. We don't quite have that sort of a publishing outfit. But yes, I mean, it's good to have exacting authors, and it's good to have people who are willing to push themselves, Nikhil. So thank you for that. Matt, I'm sure your experience would have been very different. From whatever little I know of UK publishing, I think things are a bit more structured. But if you could sort of give a little insight into, I think one of the questions that does come up with publishing in the UK is, I think one has to go through agents in the UK, and publishers don't always, unless it's commissioned, don't always sort of solicit work directly. Yeah, if you could just sort of a little sneak peek into the process.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. In the UK, obviously, it has a lot of publishers, a lot of children's publishers, big ones, and lots of independent ones as well. So there are an awful, which basically means there's a lot of competition for fiction, but also for really beautiful, wonderful non-fiction books as well. So advice would be to be prepared to be up against a lot of other people who are also really good. And most of the major publishers will require you to have an agent. Some do still accept unsolicited submissions, but not that many. So the best piece of advice would be to pick up a copy of I think it's the Writers and Artists Handbook, which I'm sure everybody has heard about, and to get hold of that and then go through a list of agents or publishers that accept unsolicited manuscripts, and find something that you're passionate about. Find a subject that you love and that you really want to tell the world about. Don't, people say, well, you've got to study the market. Where's the hole in the market? Which I guess is quite good advice, but actually by the time you've written your book and it's come to publication, that hole may have been filled 2 years before. So find something that you're passionate about. Find a subject that you really, really want to write or illustrate, or both, if you're as talented as Nikhil is, and send it out and see what happens. But also, I would echo his advice: you have to do the work. You have to create something. You have to do the thing that you plan on doing, and that means you have to sit down and actually do the grind. I mean, it took me a long time to get published. I had a lot of rejection, and I gave up quite a few times as well. And I just thought, oh, this is too difficult. I'm going to stop now, because I'm just too lazy. I just thought, oh, I've been rejected twice now. Then obviously this isn't for me. So I stayed at being an editor, and then someone would say, don't be, you've got to put the work in. So you put the work in, and sometimes it pays off. But I never take anything for granted. That's the other thing. I think if I was going to give one piece of advice to any writer, wherever they are in their career, whether they're unpublished at the moment, is celebrate the good things that happen. Celebrate the things that encourage you to keep going. Even if it's finishing a chapter that you're pleased with, doing a piece of art that you love, or getting a rejection letter from an editor that said, well, we don't really want this, but we really liked your introduction, or we really like your writing style. Anything that buoys you up, gives you a bit of confidence, focus on that. Don't focus on the negative stuff. Don't focus on the rejections, because that you will get those. But buy yourself a bar of chocolate when you do something good. And focus on that. It's very hard not to, because we tend to focus on the negative. But that's what I've learned to do. Because I still get rejected, of course, now all the time. I send ideas out and they don't want them, and I allow myself to be upset for maybe a day. Then I got on with something else. You move on. It's easy to say it. It's harder to put it into practice, because rejection is always horrible, especially when you've poured your heart and soul into something. But unfortunately, in the UK, as I said, there's a lot of competition, a lot of very talented people out there, and they're all wanting to get that spot that you're after. So put in the work, but always focus on the good things that happen, because they will. They will happen. And yeah, that's
nice to know. Actually, that's nice to know. I mean, in the sense, one would imagine if you've been an editor, you would sort of not have to suffer too many rejections, because you'll have an in on things that probably an unpublished first-time writer might not. But it's encouraging to know that, because it means it's stuff for everyone and not just.
Oh yeah.
So, we have 5 minutes before we go into questions from our lovely audience. But to both of you, if you want to talk a little bit about things that you're working on right now, if you have anything to show or anything, just to talk about it, please feel free. Nikhil, what are you working on now?
I am trying fiction now for the first time, and I'm finding that it's a totally different challenge, but it's really fun. It's almost like nonfiction feels um, like carving marble. Like you already have the block, and then you are carving it, and you're leaving behind something. Whereas doing fiction feels like, I don't know, making a sculpture out of clay, where you have nothing, and you're just putting little bits of clay and building something up. And I'm finding it to be an amazing challenge and also really fun, because it's like in nonfiction you have this infinite world and you want to like give it order, and here we have nothing and you want to create something but give a sense of an infinite world behind it. You know what I mean? Like you're creating 5 characters or something, but you want to give it a feeling of a full complete world that exists, and you are just seeing these 5 characters maybe, for example.
Yeah.
So that part is really fun, but it's also a historical setting. And for a change, like it's kind of nice to not be too bogged down with the historical details, because I've just decided that front page, the first page is going to be a big disclaimer that this is not historical at all. Even though the setting is very historical, it's the modern time, so it's very like well-known period in Indian history and very famous characters. But I'm just going to be like, this is not history, so don't even try to like compare, because even with this book, like a bunch of historians, they were like, oh, but we don't know this, how do you know that? Like there was a sculpture of a man wearing like a piece of cloth, and it's broken from the bottom. So now I had to show this, I wanted to show this man actually like going about his daily life or whatever. So of course I have to show him, at some point I have to show him in full. So I showed the full dress, whatever, till the bottom, and I didn't know if it goes up to the knees or to the ankles. Okay, so I made it to somewhere in between the knees and the ankles. And one historian was like, don't you think what you have written this, do you really think this is history? Don't you think you should call it fantasy, because you just made it up? So I was like, well, but she hadn't read the book, so anyway.
Okay.
Because in the book, it's like, just before I show this man, I say that there's a lot we don't know, but it's fun to wonder. That was literally the sentence. Like but we can wonder. We don't know a lot, but we can wonder. And then it comes to, but anyway, so this one I'm just gonna be like, this is not history, and I'm just gonna take liberties. If it's not the correct costume, well, you know what? That's fine. It's more
No one
about
else knows today. No one else knows, so they can't say it's wrong or right. So it's fine.
yeah, you weren't there, right?
So you're creating Nikhil Gulati's history then.
It's not history anymore. In fact, it's just a story. I mean, even history, even non-fiction, it's really just fiction to me, because you are telling something. I know you're making that face, but I really believe this. You're not even using the language that those people used. So what do you even know what those people were thinking? You're using modern language. You're using words that you have context for, and that your reader is going to have their own context for. They're going to see the world in that light. If you use the word religion, it has a very specific context today. 500 years ago, the word religion in India especially didn't exist. So you were not even thinking in that way. There was no thing called religion. So what are you even saying? You're telling your own version of something. So I mean, I know I'm making a sort of a extreme point, but the point is that what you're saying is what's important. Like, and it's important for who, like you saying it today.
Okay.
That's what's important. Like to me, the Indus Valley is interesting because I can't even believe that there's a civilization that existed for 1,000 years without war, for example. So what's interesting is that it's possible to have a sophisticated, organized, disciplined, materially rich society without war. That possibility is what's interesting to me, and that possibility, expressing that to people of today who are busy fighting wars all over the place, is what is interesting to me. And it's not necessarily important whether the dress goes all the way to the ankle or the knee. So in that sense is what I mean. That
No, I mean, I think that's a fair point, well made. But I suppose one of the things is always we have to kind of work in frameworks, but that's a separate conversation for another chat with you, Nikhil. I'm going to come to you, Matt. What are you working on right now? And I'm going to just sort of draw a framework for you to talk about it in 3 minutes before we get to our audience.
Okay. So I'm working on something of a dream project, actually, which is come quite quickly, but I'm getting to write a novelization of for children of the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow.
Which I started working on. The deadline is insane. They're giving me about 7 weeks to do it, and you can imagine the amount of research that's involved in something. Although I'm only telling a story that took 2 hours and 40 minutes, you know, from the moment I'm basically starting it, the moment the iceberg appears to the moment the ship disappears beneath the waves. But there were over 2,000 people on the ship. There were 3 different classes. There were the crew. There was how the ship worked. There's the process of how it sank. It's something I've been fascinated by for a long time. And to be given the opportunity to tell the story, obviously I'm doing it from my perspective as someone living in 2025, and this happened well over 100 years ago. But the advantage of it is that there is so much information about it, because everyone's been fascinated by it since the moment it sank, pretty much. There's so much research. So going back to one of your earlier questions about the amount of research and how I choose to leave out things, this has been an absolute abject lesson in what to leave out, because there, as I said, there were over 2,000 stories. 2,000 people went through that awful night, and I have to experiences. But I also need to explain how the ship worked, because otherwise there would be no context. So I've had to contextualize, tell a story, make it gripping. It's been a real challenge because, again, I've had no time to do it, and I've basically just been doing this for the last 5. It's all I can think. I think about it almost all the time. I deliberately stopped working on it yesterday so I could actually have a fresh brain to talk about Norse mythology today. Otherwise, I would have just answered every single question in the context of Titanic, which probably wouldn't have been very useful to you or for this conversation. So I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm getting to do the art illustration briefs for it as well, which is wonderful because, again, as I said, I can use the illustration briefs and the art to help explain specific aspects that are quite complicated in the text. But yes, so it's going to be basically the story of the sinking of the Titanic, as historically accurate as I can tell it, and I'm really enjoying it. But it's also very emotional and very sad to work on it as well, because it's a terrible tragedy. So I feel a kind of weight of responsibility to sort of say it, to tell the story in a respectful way, and bearing in mind that I'm only understanding it from other people's perspectives. And yeah, it's a challenge, but I'm enjoying it hugely, and I'm slightly obsessed by it, as you can tell. Yeah.
All the best for the wonderful books that are yet to come out of both of you. And on that note, thank you so much for the chat. And I'm going to hand over to Lexi for the questions that she has from students who couldn't make it today, as well as our wonderful audience. If any of you have questions, please feel free to either pop them in the chat or to just raise your hands and ask them directly to our wonderful authors.
Thank you all so much for that fascinating conversation. It's just so interesting to hear the differences and the similarities, and to get to see how these books work in a sort of practical industry sense, but also a creative sense in very different contexts. So thank you so much. I've got a question from Katie. So Katie, are you happy to unmute? Because that would be lovely. And then anyone else, do ask away. Laura Elizabeth, I'm sure you'll have something, having been part of the audience. And Ellen, just to say, welcome to the audience. Ellen is one of the editors of Leaf magazine, academic journal, sorry, I was doing just magazine things earlier. Ellen edits Leaf Journal, which is a wonderful showcase of creative writing, research and practice, and it's where some of the first literature across borders material was published. So just to say a shout out, and if you want to read more about us, Leaf has very kindly published some stuff, so come to Katie at that point. Thank you.
Hi. Where do you go to do your research? Do you go to libraries and museums, or are there other places that you go to?
Shall I hand that to Nikhil first, and then we'll come to Matt? Is that all right?
Oh, sure. For this book, I went to a lot of friends, in fact, who are archaeologists and researchers, and that was the starting point, in fact. because I also was bouncing off ideas about, because even in the academic world, it's not like this is truth. It's just, okay, most archaeologists believe this and some believe something else. So, and if one person has worked on a particular site for longer, their opinion on that site is a little more reliable. So things like that, which I wasn't sure of. So I needed people who were in the field to kind of ask these ideas. Hey, I read this paper by this guy. What do you think about him? And how respected is he in the field? And if he's talking about language, is that reliable? If he's talking about some other archaeological thing, is that more reliable, etc. So that was my starting point, in fact. And yeah, and from that to all the way to like actual, like a lot of the research was done 100 years ago. So that itself has become history. Like the original archaeology reports from Mohenjo-daro are already 100 years old. So looking for those in the archives and then pouring through those 600-page reports. So it's like the whole gamut of research possibilities is what I went for.
Sure.
So most of my research would be online. Most of the subjects I choose are quite well researched anyway. They're not obscure. So there's usually a lot of information online. And obviously I go to libraries, I buy books, I historical magazines, I do go to museums. It's all the obvious places really, but it's mostly, it'll be online, yeah, because I can just sit all day and just do as much research as I need to. The trick is to learn what's reliable, what isn't. Make sure you cross-reference everything. Make sure that there's more people who agree with what you're going to say than don't. And I don't always get that right because I'm not an expert in anything. I have to rely on these sources. Luckily, my publishers will normally run my manuscripts past people who do know what they're talking about, and then they'll come back to me. All these wonderful academics will come back and tell me, don't look at Wikipedia because it's not accurate. And yeah, and then they put me straight, and then I'll change it because of course I will. Sometimes they try and rewrite the text, which I have to scold them about. But generally speaking, they're a brilliant resource, and I will always, because I have no recourse. I'm not an expert, so I do rely on these people to correct me when I'm wrong, and that's fine. I want to be as accurate as possible. But yeah, the research is one of the most fun parts of it. It's much easier than writing. The writing's the hard bit.
Thank you both so much, and thank you so much, Katie. Laura Elizabeth, are you happy to unmute? So as you've heard, Laura Elizabeth is one of the students who is having an international dialogue on your book. So take it away, Laura Elizabeth.
Yeah, hi. My question is for Nikhil. So I love your book, and the fact that there's no color in it was it's more stark, the graphic, the black and white. And I'm the one who said, it's like a museum visit. I'm in the section on page 151 where you're talking about language, and then the other side is archaeology, and that there are lots of physical remains by the bucket loads, but then you say, but it is entirely mute. And that sentence really stood out to me because when I'm looking in chapter 3, just section 3 on the bead, the details of the metal they use, that's page 72, the explanation of the fine jewelry they made, how they carved steatite seals for ruling clans and families, the illustration of a kiln, because I studied ceramic myself, so I was like, I saw that, I was like, oh, I was swoon, and then shipbuilding, I was amazed, and international maritime trade. And I see what you mean when you say it's entirely mute. But looking at this, it wasn't mute to me at all. I could see what they valued. I could see that they had toys. I could see that they had masks. I could see that they had hairstyles. You could see their values in their art. And the thing that got me the most was the miniature sculptures. And I had said with Meghaa and the discussion that it was as if they were holding the sacred things in their hand, in the palm of their hand. They didn't need a pyramid. Why would they need a pyramid? Why would they need a huge statue? Every person had the right to have something sacred. So my question was, did your editor make you put that sentence in there? But it's entirely mute because you're an artist. You don't think all this stuff is mute. You can't.
Well, It was more to make a point here that
Okay.
there are two streams of evidence and one has no words. They're not mute for sure. I mean, anyway,
Okay.
we say that most of communication is non-verbal. So of
Yeah.
course there is a lot we know, but it's interesting because we don't even know what language they spoke. We don't know what their names were. We don't know, like we're looking at Norse myths, for example. We know so much about the gods and the stories. Here we don't know the stories, so we have to guess at it. And there's another whole stream of evidence which roughly talks about the same geography, roughly the same time period. It has text upon text upon texts, but there's no one piece of pottery or anything that we can point to and be like, this was made by these people who told those stories. So it was just to make a point that there are these two very separate streams of evidence that look like they overlap in geography and in the time, but we can't say anything for sure. So it was just to make that point. But yeah, you're right. But
Yeah, can I ask you one more?
Maybe a good editor would have picked that out. So anyway, that's
Oh,
my
yeah.
but it was meant to make a point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it really struck me. I was like, no, it's not mute. And I was reading and going, no, I can
Yeah.
feel it. Do you think that pretty soon they're going to find like a Rosetta Stone to translate are they close? Are we close to getting this?
No.
No. Okay.
I
I'm
don't
very
think so,
disappointed.
but I'm not an expert. But I am hopeful though, because I like to believe that things can happen and some new thing will turn up, and there are some potential solutions. So we know that a lot of these people from the Indus Valley were living in Mesopotamia. That we know for a fact because we find a lot of their stuff over there. And there are some seals where the script is cuneiform, but the language is different. So if those can be deciphered, we might get some hints. Like if we can decipher a name and it sounds like something we know of, then we might get some clues. So there is some hope for it, but as far as I know, it looks quite unlikely right now. Although that hasn't stopped people from offering decipherments. There's over 100 different decipherments that have been done, but no two agree with each other. So they're probably just made up. But I do have hope, but it looks like a difficult thing.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Lexi, did you have questions from some of the students who couldn't make it today?
Well, I think that you've covered most of them, and we're sort of coming out to the point where we're slightly out of time. But there was just one thing I thought we could end on as an interesting note, because I think it's so important in this field, which is there anything just you can briefly tell us about any tie-ins to the curriculum or any responses from library groups, museums or something that really brought this project to life for you and was a key part to that? I'll come to Matt first and then come to you, Nikhil, and then we'll close. Thank you so much.
I don't think there was any kind of partnership with Norse Myths as far as I'm aware, no. But some of my books, some publishers do love to have partnerships with certain museums and universities. Nosy Crow, who I've written for, they one of my books is University of Cambridge, their zoology museum, and so it does help. I think apparently the American market, they really like American children's market. They love it when there's a sort of some kind of like an affiliation with Cambridge University or some wonderful museum somewhere. And also it means their experts get to read the manuscripts. But as far as I'm aware, not for Norse Myths, no. But more and more books are finding these partnerships. And Nosy Crow, who are one of the English publishers or British publishers, they're really hot on that. They've got British Transport Museum, I think, and yeah, they've got quite a few. So it's definitely something which they do think about and they do try and get. It's good for both parties, I think as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly on that note, shout out to Bloomsbury, who are doing a book with historic royal palaces to sort of bring things to life for Halloween with ghost stories. And I think it's a really interesting element. So just to fill that out for people watching. And Nikhil, did you want to sort of add anything that you had to say about that context in India and how the book's been received?
I don't think there's been done anything like in a systemic way, partnering with the library or schools or anything, but a lot of readers have reached out to me, and I've been surprised by where all the book has reached. And I had written this book for an older audience. I hadn't written it for kids, but I was surprised by how many kids actually have read it and enjoyed it. Like the youngest reader was 6, and I was like, there's no way a 6-year-old is going to read this book. But the parent was telling me that the kid, she just looks at the illustrations and she points at stuff, and then I tell her some of the stories. And so I found that to be very interesting. I never envisioned somebody reading this book in that way. But even museums have reached out. In fact, I'm working with the museum right now, a museum in Mumbai that's doing a whole exhibit on this civilization. And they're recreating one of the cities in like 3D, like an actual physical model of it. So I'm partnering with them to sort of tell some of the stories about it. And yeah, I have gone around to certain schools and spoken about the book, and a lot of kids have shown a lot of interest. And yeah, so there hasn't been anything done like systemically or whatever, but it has gotten around to schools, libraries, museums, and stuff. Sort of
I
on
think
its own.
it's sort of such a part of our school syllabus here that I think it sort of just very organically also sort of lends itself to classroom discussion, which is
Yeah.
wonderful.
And what I
That's
found interesting is that it's gone from like schools who are teaching this topic, so kids are reading this book because that topic is being covered,
yes.
all the way to like there are some college courses that are using this book in India to look at how we can tell nonfiction through this medium. So like from a very academic perspective of how can we use this medium to tell certain kinds of stories. So it's sort of gone, the whole spectrum. So that's been very interesting and eye-opening and very rewarding, in fact.
Sure. Lexi.
Just like this conversation. Thank you both so very much. And thank you, Meghaa, and thank you to our wonderful audience. And thank you, everyone, for letting us record, because I think this will be a wonderful resource to put out into the world as we try and encourage more conversations of this sort. So thank you very much from me, and over to you, Meghaa.
Yes, I mean, I couldn't say anything more to, whatever has already transpired by way of conversation today. It's really interesting that we got to pair two great illustrated bits of two great illustrated historical texts that approach civilizations through very interesting windows. Matt's book does it through the imagination of these people, the Vikings, and the stories they told, and Nikhil's book does it through the culture and the beliefs of these people who lived so many thousands of years back. And it sort of just tells us that even though times change, there are some basic human motivations and interests that probably stand the test of time, and that's so wonderful. And certainly in the world that we live in, this need to sort of understand and empathize with each other's histories more than just our own, which often school curricula end up focusing on, is just so important. So we're very, very glad that we got to do that through Literature Across Borders this year. Thank you so much, Nikhil and Matt. It's been just wonderful having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking out time and being part of Literature Across Borders this year.
Thank you. This has been great. It's been great listening to Matt. In fact, I got a bunch of ideas actually, and it was good to connect in that way with another author, because authors are in their own worlds, writing or drawing or whatever. So it's good to connect, and as you said, it's absolutely critical in today's world to do this cross-border kind of idea exchange and stuff in order to build that empathy that we very seriously lack right now. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it any better than you guys. I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. I could talk about publishing and books and writing all day. So this has been genuine pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been really, really fun.
Thank you. I think, yeah, it's been a wonderful evening here in India, and I suppose a wonderful afternoon in the UK to audiences tuning in from there. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.